Hello and welcome to another LeetCode video. Today we're going to be doing LeetCode number 25, reverse k nodes in a group. And you're given the head of a linked list and you want to reverse the nodes in the list k at a time and return the modified list. K is a positive integer and is less than or equal to the length of the list. If the number of nodes is not a multiple of k, then left out nodes should not be reversed. And you may not alter the values in the list nodes, only the nodes themselves may be changed. And so in this first example, we're given 4 nodes. And essentially, the way it's going to look is we're given 4 nodes, right? So you have node 1, goes to node 2, goes to node 3, goes to node 4, goes to node 5. And we are going to be reversing the chunks of the list a chunk at a time. So you can see first we need to reverse this chunk here. And so this chunk reverse is actually going to be 2, 1. And now that chunk needs to connect to this chunk reverse, and that chunk reverse is going to be 4, 3. And then finally for 5, we don't reverse it because we don't have enough nodes to reverse, so we just put in a 5. And so it's a pretty straightforward problem. I think the implementation is kind of straightforward. It's more about how to handle this problem, right? Like, what are we actually doing? And so we're actually going to go through this example in depth and like what we're going to be doing right now. Okay, so let's go through it here. So we're going to draw this one more time. So we're going to have 1 goes to 2, goes to 3, goes to 4, goes to 5, and we need to do this. We need to do this reverse, and then we have a k value. So k value equals 2. Okay. And we're reversing 2 nodes at a time. Pretty straightforward. Now, how are we going to do this? First thing we're going to want to do for all these list node problems, anytime you do list reversals, especially when you have chunks, is you want to make a dummy node. And the nice thing about a dummy node is like if you flip these 2 nodes, if you didn't have a dummy node, like what's the new head? It's kind of hard to say. Well, now we're going to have a dummy node, and so it's going to make it easier to do these reversals. So essentially, we're going to go down this whole list, and we're going to take chunks and we're going to reverse. Now, these are the steps that you need. So we're going to have a current node. It's going to start at the dummy node. And we're going to loop through this until the current node is null. So what we're actually going to do is for every single loop, here's what we're going to do. We're going to initialize a start node. And that's going to symbolize the node right before the start of the chunk that we're reversing. So we're going to be reversing this chunk. And so we need to make a start node over here. And we're going to be reversing this chunk. So now we actually go through this list, and how many nodes do we need to go? It's 2, right? So we're going to move our curve twice. And then the other thing we're going to do is while we're moving our current node, if we are ever out of bounds in the movement of our current node, it means we don't have a big enough chunk to reverse. And so if we don't have a big enough chunk to reverse, we can just return dummy.next, which would be like the head of the node, because we don't have a big enough chunk to reverse. But I'll get into that. Okay, so we're going to move our curve twice because we need a 2-node chunk. And now we're going to have an end node. And that end node is going to be the node right after the current, right? So you want to have this. You really want a start, which is right before the start, and then an end, which is right before the end. That way, when you reverse this chunk, you know where to connect it, right? And so now we're going to have a helper function that's just going to be a standard list reverse, which is like an easy LeetCode. That's going to take this node here. It's going to be the head of the list. And once we make this end, by the way, we're actually going to chop off this right here. So we're going to chop off this. This is going to go away. Okay, so now this is our list. So we chop this off because we're going to be reversing this part of the list. So once we reverse, right, so what's the reverse going to be of the 2, 1? Well, it's pretty straightforward. So it's going to, once we do reverse, it's actually going to be a 2 and a 1, right, like this. And then once we do have this reverse list, we're actually going to return a tuple of the head and the tail of the list because we're going to need to connect everything, right? So we're going to take our dummy node, or not our dummy node, wherever the start is. In this case, it's our dummy node. So we're going to take the start. We're going to connect it to the head of the new list that we returned. And then we're going to take the tail of the new list and we're going to connect it to this end node here. And so we're going to connect it like this. 3. This is 4, 5. Okay, so we're going to have this end node here. And now remember where our current was, right? So our current was actually over. I think what we want to do, yeah. So we want the current to be. We're actually going to set the current to the tail of the list we returned, because our current was the head of the list. It was over here, but we actually want to set the current to the tail of the list we returned. And now you can see kind of like this is a recursive problem, right? Where here our current was right before the chunk we're reversing, and once again here our current is right before the chunk we're going to be reversing, which is over here. Okay, so now that our current is here, we're going to keep going. So we're actually going to delete this start and this end. And what we're going to do is we are going to move our current again. So we're going to make a new start. So we're going to make a start over here, right? And then this, we can also remove this head and this tail because we've done the reversal. We just needed that for the return. So now it's going to be this kind of situation again. We're going to make a new start. We're going to move our current twice. So we're going to move it current here, here. And now the end is going to be the node right after the current, just like last time. So our end is going to be here. So we have a start, we have an end, and we have a chunk. And remember also, before we do the reversal, we actually need to delete the node over here, right? So current dot. So once we make this end, we can just say current.next equals none. We delete that node, get rid of it. Perfect. Now we need to reverse this chunk here. And so that's what we're going to do next. And this is going to be the head. This is going to be the tail. So we're going to reverse this 3 and 4. Once we reverse this 3 and 4, what's that going to be? Well, it's pretty straightforward. It's going to be a 4 and a 3. So we reverse that chunk. Now we have our old list. So let's just draw out the old list. It's going to go to 2. Going to go to 1. Going to go to, so this is the start was over here, remember? Now we're going to connect the start. So we're actually going to connect the start to the new head. So the new head is actually over here, right? So this is the new head. This is the new tail. So we're going to connect the start to the new head. And then we're going to connect the new tail to the end. So that's going to connect over here to this end. So this 5 value. And once we have that, now where was our current? So remember, we're going to initialize our current to the tail. Every time we did the reverse, our current is going to be over here. And now we're going to do the same thing. So we don't need this start and end again. We can get rid of it because we just did a reversal. Now we're going to do the same thing. We're going to set a start value to right where the current is. We're going to start here. Now we're going to move the current twice. So we're going to move the current once here. And then when we try to move it one more time, we're actually out of bounds. And so because we're out of bounds, that means we don't have enough nodes to reverse the next chunk. And as soon as we don't have enough nodes to reverse the next chunk, then we can just return. So we're actually going to return a new list, and this is going to be the head. We're just going to return dummy.next, and then this is going to be 21435. So hopefully that makes sense, where you traverse through the list, you make a dummy node, you have a start right before you do the reverse, you have an end right where you're going to reverse to. You cut out this path here. You can technically cut out the path after the start, but we're going to be reassigning it anyway. So you can make this none if it makes it easier for you, but we're going to be reassigning it anyway to the new head of the list, right? So like here, we are reassigning and things like that. So if you wanted to make it easier for your understanding, you could say, yeah, okay, let's just cut this out. Let's reverse the list, and then let's make the start point to the new head of the list, and let's make the new tail list point to the end. Then we make our current equals to the tail list, and we do that same thing again, right? Where we get rid of the start and the tail. And then we move the current up enough, and then we reverse chunks at a time. And then our end condition is when the current's out of bounds, or when we try to move the current forward to get our new chunk, and we just don't have enough elements in the chunk, just like in this example, right? So in this example, you only have 2 chunks to reverse. Once you get to the 3rd chunk, you only have 1 element, so we can't actually reverse that. So now what we need to do is we need to look at the code. We have enough, so I actually have the code for it. I'm going to go through it. And so for the code here it is. So we have a helper function to reverse a list. So like, because we're going to be calling it multiple times, we're going to be reversing chunks. We can be calling this a ton. And so to reverse a list, we're going to take a head. And remember, we cut off the tail, or we didn't cut off the tail, but we made the tail node of the list point to none. And so in our picture, right, like when we're reversing a chunk, we have a head like here, let's say, and the tail points to none. So then we know that's our end condition. Like we can just keep going. We can keep trying to reverse until we get to none. So this is just a standard list reverse. Like this is like LeetCode easy, you know, except the only difference is in a normal list reverse, prev is going to be the new head, but we need the new head and the new tail because we're actually going to be, like once we do get the new tail, we actually need to connect it to the end. So we need both of these nodes, the start of the reverse list and the end. So I just return them in a tuple. You can return them in an array, whatever works. So now we make this dummy node that connects to the head like in the picture. We make our current node start at the dummy, and this is essentially what I was doing in that picture. So you make the start node equal to the cur, you say num nodes equals k because this is how many nodes I need to go, and then this part of the code is when we're actually making our cur go forward to get our next chunk. And if at any point we get to none, that means we don't have enough nodes in the chunk, so we can just return, and then we just keep subtracting from the num nodes. So num nodes is going to be whatever the length of the chunk is. Now we get the end node, which is the node after the current node, and we set the current next equals none, because remember, when we actually set this end node, we need to break this path here to be able to reverse the list. Otherwise, when we're reversing, we're going to reverse, more than we need. So we need to figure out an end condition to reverse the list. So once we set this end node, we're going to break this. And like I said, the chunk, this next right here, you can break, but we're reassigning it anyway, so it's not going to affect anything. Okay. And so now you just simply call list reverse, and you have the chunk head and the chunk tail, which is the head of the new list and the tail of the new list. And now you just say, so remember the start node needs to point to the new head of the new list, and then the new tail needs to point to the end node, and then we just start again where we set the cur equals to the chunk tail, just like I did in the picture, right? So once we reverse a chunk, we're going to set the cur equal to the tail of the reverse list, and we're going to be doing this loop again, and we get rid of the start and this end. Okay, and so let's actually try to, and then finally we need to return dummy.next because that's going to be the head of the list. So we can try to run this, and it should be good. Okay, so it did get accepted. And let's think of the runtime for this problem. So let's actually go some space here. So for the time, what are we doing? We're going through the list, and we are reversing one chunk at a time. So we're going to be going through it one time, and then one more time for reverse. So it's technically like 2n. But that's going to simplify down to O of n. And for our space, we didn't create any new nodes. We just used constant space, right? We just used these like a dummy node, a previous current, but nothing extra. So it's going to be O of 1. And so that's going to be that. And that's going to be it for this problem. And I also started using a new program to draw. So hopefully you'll be able to read what I actually write now. And if you guys enjoy that over Paint, let me know in the comments. Because I'm definitely trying to find something better than Paint. And I'm going to try to do a little bit more video editing so it doesn't look like it was made by a 5th grader. But yeah, I will see you in the next video, and thanks for watching.